Welcome to Talking Business, a podcast produced in Melbourne, Australia. The podcast is available on the Acast site, my own website, the Apple Podcast Store, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. Or you can get it at the Business Acumen website at www.businessacumen.biz. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from my website, leongettler.com. I am Leon Gettler. My job is to review and monitor the week's news in business, finance and economics. I bring it all to you every week. This is episode number 20 in our series for 2025, and today's date is Friday, June the 27th. First, I'll be talking to Jesse Kalsi, a world-renowned numerologist and successful real estate broker by trade. I know, it sounds weird, but what can I say? If people want to talk to me, that's great. And if I have interesting stuff that might interest us, all the better. And I will talk to independent economist Saul Leslake about Trump's exit from G7, Trump's big beautiful bill, and his negotiations with China. But first, let's talk to Jesse Kalsi.
Well, Jesse, you're a numerologist and you bring your skills to bear on the real estate industry and helping clients find property real estate. Tell us about it.
Yeah, that's true. So quickly to give you a background, Leon, there are many schools of numerology. It's very popular around the world now. The Chinese have a tradition. The East Indians practice something that I follow. And then there's something here in North America. The Hebrews have a system. The Greeks look at numbers differently. But I've been practicing numbers, which is the Vedic tradition, and numbers based on that tradition, which is basically numbers in planetary energies. And I've also been actively involved in the business of real estate properties since 1995. So I came to the States in 88, but soon after I got into properties. And I've been using this information of the science of numbers very effectively for quite some years now. And so what I believe is, and I've seen this over the years, with many people that I've had the chance to work with and close escrows, that numerology has a very profound impact on on the success of a business or on the prosperity of family and good health and other good things of life when they live in certain homes that match their energies. And so that's what it is basically.
So tell me how it works.
Okay. So what happens is, we basically go to the basic, we go to the basic imprint. I give you my example, right? So I'm born on April the 3rd of some year. And see, my basic energy based on my, my numbers is numbers threes and number nines, which 3 is Jupiter energy and number 9 is Mars energy. And so what happens is, I've seen this over the years, even before I got into numbers and, doing what I did, that these numbers were repeating in my life constantly. And each time when I tried to change or do something different, the results were different. But at that time, that was prior to coming to America, I never realized, I never paid any attention to it. But then soon after coming here and, like most immigrants, starting all over again and, being surmounted by so many challenges, this information started coming in. And then it is then that I started really using it effectively. So, and I'll also like to say that I don't come from a family of numerologists, astrologers, or nothing like that. I'm a Sikh, like you say, by tradition and by faith, and no one in my family does practice numbers and numerology. So this just came to me as a part of my life's journey. So now, if you look at my date of birth, has a lot of 3s and number 9s, which is Jupiter and Mars energy. And so over the years, I've bought and sold many properties. I lived in different homes, and I've always stuck to my basic numbers, which is number 3s and number 9s. And I found them to they've yielded great results for me. They've brought a lot of positive energies, which we all want, and that is how I've done my business too over the years. People came to me and their numbers and street numbers and home numbers and whatever little I knew, that was just one angle to buying a property. There are so many other ways to look at energies in different ways, but that was just one perspective, and many believed it and many did not. But whoever believed it and whoever I worked with, it did work. And that's how this book, The Power of Home Numbers, was born. And it has all those examples in there are true, and they're all my clients that I've written about there.
But the numbers you use are what? Their birth dates or their street numbers or what?
So let's see what example so what happens is, say for example, I consult with you, right? So it's a little detailed, it's not just straight looking at numbers and saying 5 + 1 is 6 or all that. It's a little more deeper than that. Now, say for example, let's look at number 9, right? Number 9 is the energy of Mars, which is my number. And I currently live in a apartment number V27, and I've lived in a similar number before too for many years. So so that is how we look at him, right? So now, say for example, number 9 is 9, and number 18 is 9, and number 27 is 9, and number 36 is 9, and the rest of it. Now, say for example, if you say, hey Jesse, you said 9 is a great number for you. So I have this great property and it's a great sale, and the number is 108. I can get you a great deal. Why don't you buy it? Now, with what I said, will I buy it? No, I will not buy it, because though it adds up to a 9, but the planetary energy in there with Sun and Saturn together, 1s and 8s together, they don't work at all. It's colliding energy, right? It's very challenging energy, and so that is the reason why I would stay away from that one. But if you say, hey Jesse, there's a number 306 or 6300, something like that, which I lived in earlier, this is available in this part of the world, and great property, would you consider that? I will definitely. So it is deeper than just saying, oh, if 3 is your number and you add. No, it's not. It's way deeper than that. It's planetary, considering planetary energies and date of births, but your application of this system is very effective.
So you would go with on a street number, you'd go with the planetary energy, you'd go with the date of birth, etc., with different clients, right?
Exactly. That is correct.
But everyone has a different date of birth.
Exactly. That's what it is, right? So everybody has different numbers. I mean, one shoe doesn't fit all, right? It's different for everybody. And then what happens is you're getting into homes that there are families, right? And each family has, different date of birth, they're all different. And if they get into a home with certain numbers, sometimes, it's good for some, it's not good for the others, and so there's something called as number patching, which is a technique that I've researched over the years, where we use additional numbers, a small sticker here and there on the address, basically as planetary energies to shift the vibration, to correct it a little bit. And I've done number patching for here in the United States for many, many years, and it's worked quite well.
So you would be able to find clients a good investment property, a good home property based on their numbers.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. We can look at the numbers and suggest, the best energies that would work for them, and so that they can be in the right frequency, right? You have to be in the right frequency that works with you to be happy and successful, is what I believe.
But everyone has different numbers, so everyone would have a different application. So you'd have
absolutely, to exactly, absolutely. It's different for everybody.
Well, I'm number 17. What can you tell me?
So 17 is so what month is 17? What month? 17?
January.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So 17 is Saturn twice. So January, the month is ruled by the energy of Saturn, which is number 8 anyway. So Saturn is kind of slow, cold, deliberate. It's basically, it starts slowly. You shouldn't marry before the age of 30, right? But if you do, early marriages will not work. Basic numbers with this foundation would be like both numbers, 3s, 5s, 6s would be your best numbers, which means I think you're wearing the right color too. You should avoid wearing the color red, which is Mars, or not drive a black car. I say, what color car do you drive?
Gray.
Gray? The gray is better than black. Okay. Yeah, that's good. So yeah, so if you stay in more blue, beige, green, off-white, these colors, and your best numbers would be numbers 3s, 5s, and 6s in that energy. See, 6 would be an excellent number for you. It's interesting. I said that right in the beginning, even asking you. So the energy of Venus would be great, because you're in the energy of Capricorn, ruled by number 8, which is Saturn, and Saturn is very happy with Venus. And I say much number 6. So I don't know, what house number are you living in right now? Just
number 4.
Number 4?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a heavy number. That's heavy. How long have you been there?
Close to 40 years.
Oh, it's true. I'll make a suggestion for you, maybe, just one quick suggestion. So with the 4, you could add, I think you should add a number 1 in the beginning, like a number 1 sticker. If you can get a small number 1 sticker and put it before the 4, what will happen is it comes into Sun and Uranus energy. So 1 and 4 is Sun and Uranus energy, and that is very compatible with your date of birth. And that at the same time is also very good for, I think it's like more movement, and the wheels need to spin more. You know how it is? That the vehicle needs to, pick up speed is what it is. So I think that'll be a great thing to do. That's my suggestion to you.
So that's the kind of advice you give clients.
Yeah, that is one of the things I tell them. Yeah. Besides, looking at complete names and businesses and a whole bunch of other stuff. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And they're quite receptive to that?
Oh, of course they are. Yeah, I do. I have, people all over the place. I have big stars and very, very big stars in Bollywood, mega stars.
Yeah. And of course, you're based in California as well.
Yeah, exactly. And California as well. Yeah. So we have a lot of people over the years and all that. We consult, and by the grace of God.
Well, Jesse, it's been great talking to you, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And now let's talk to independent economist Saul Eslake.
Well, Saul, there's been all sorts of issues with Donald Trump, first at the G7, and now he's leaving early before meeting Albanese, would you believe? And he's also done all sorts of behaviour at the G7, saying we have to bring Russia back into the G7, back into, was the G8. He's got his big, beautiful bill and all the issues there. And, of course, the negotiations with China, which seem to have taken us back to square one. What's your view about all of that?
Well, clearly Donald Trump is, again, demonstrating that he has more affection for the US's adversaries, Russia and China, and perhaps even North Korea, than he does for the US's traditional allies. He doesn't regard international fora like the G7 as being particularly useful or helpful in advancing what he sees as America's interests. And he obviously doesn't regard Australia as particularly important. Now, in saying that, I don't deny that the events transpiring in the Middle East are of considerable importance to the US, and it's not surprising that he might be choosing to focus on those. But maybe from an Australian perspective, it's a good thing that the Prime Minister won't be meeting with Donald Trump. Certainly it means he's not going to be subject to any kind of ritual humiliation, as the presidents of Ukraine and South Africa were in the Oval Office. And although some people have criticised Mr. Albanese for not having made a pilgrimage to Washington before to, in the president's term, kiss his ass, it's not obvious to me that those leaders who have gone to Washington offering concessions to the United States have got anything out of it. Certainly, China seems to have had the better of the negotiations with the United States over their trade disputes. Fortunately, both have backed down from the ridiculously high tariffs that they were imposing on each other in late April and early May. Both recognise that that was going to do enormous damage to both of their economies, but it would seem to me that the US has made more concessions to China than China has to the United States. Australia was unlikely ever to get any exemption from the 10% tariff that was imposed on us, notwithstanding that the US actually runs a trade surplus with Australia. In fact, Australia has the second largest deficit with the United States of any of the US's trading partners, and notwithstanding that Australia is now providing foreign aid to the United States under the AUKUS Treaty, notwithstanding that Australia is the only country whose troops have fought alongside Americans in every war the Americans have been in since 1917, and notwithstanding that Australia provides on our soil military intelligence gathering and signalling bases that are critical to US national security. Notwithstanding all of those things, it was unlikely that we were ever going to get any special treatment from the US. And in a sense, as I say, I think it might be helpful from Mr. Albanese's and Australia's perspective that they've avoided a bilateral meeting that would probably be depicted by Mr. Albanese's political opponents here as some kind of failing on his part, which I don't think it would have been, but no harm has been done.
What does this mean for the future of AUKUS?
Well, that remains up in the air, if I can use that term to describe something that's about submarines. The review that was announced by the Americans last week to be conducted by Eldridge Colby, who's a known skeptic of the AUKUS deal, does cast a cloud over it. Personally, while I don't pretend to be an expert on matters of national security and defence, I'm not and never have been persuaded that the AUKUS deal is in Australia's best interests. So if it did fall over and we were forced to think about a plan B, I, for one, would not necessarily be unduly distressed about that.
Well, the sucking sound you hear coming out of the defence budget is all AUKUS money.
Well, yes, and that's part of the concern I have, is that while I don't question for a moment that we need to increase our defence spending, not because America says we have to, but because we can't rely on the Americans as the kind of trusted security partner and ally that we have done. Since the signing of the ANZUS Treaty in the early 1950s, the Americans are demonstrating that they hold their traditional allies in contempt. And while that hasn't been expressed to us in quite the same language as it has been to the Canadians and the Europeans, the underlying message is pretty clear to any Australian who cares to look or listen at the way the Trump regime has been behaving towards its traditional allies. So, yes, we do need to spend more on defence. But I'm not at all persuaded that spending upwards of $360 billion over long-range nuclear-powered submarines is absolutely crucial to the defence of Australia compared with other things that we could spend that sort of money on.
The issue is, what does this say about the future of the G7?
Well, that is one issue. I mean, Trump obviously wants to bring his old mate Vladimir Putin back into this and call it the G8, as it was for a while, until the Russians were booted out after their illegal invasion and annexation of Crimea. But while in some ways the G7 is a bit of an anachronism because it doesn't include some of the world's most important economies, in particular China, India, Indonesia, and if you were to add them in, the Russians, I suppose, as a still significant economy. Nonetheless, it is a gathering of the most powerful democratically governed nations, and the fact that the US is, at least under Donald Trump, not particularly interested in it is just another symbol of the way the West, as we used to understand that term, is fracturing. And the key message for countries like Australia, Japan, Korea, Singapore, Canada, the EU, and those bits of Europe that are not part of the EU, like the UK, Norway, and Switzerland, is that they have to work together to create a West that doesn't include the US, because the US is no longer a reliable friend, partner, or ally of those otherwise like-minded nations.
The other big issue is Trump's big, beautiful bill, which still has to be passed by the Senate, and which is going to add trillions of dollars in debt. And there's lots of concerns being expressed by some Republicans in the Senate about it. What's your view about that?
Well, yes, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and that is actually what it's called. I mean, it's really juvenile, in my view, to be titling legislation with names like that. But this bill will, according to the Congressional Budget Office, add around $5 trillion to the budget deficits that were in any case going to run to about $20 trillion over the next decade. They will push US public debt, which is already at 100% or thereabouts of GDP, the highest it's been since the end of the Second World War, to levels that, according to another independent body, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, levels that are exceeded at the moment only by Japan and Sudan, which is kind of nice company for the world's major economy, the issuer of the world's principal reserve currency, nice company for it to be keeping. There are other aspects of this bill that are of concern to Australians. For example, there's a particularly nasty provision called Section 899, which threatens to impose taxes of initially 5%, rising by 5 percentage points each year to a maximum of 20% on income earned in the United States by taxpayers from countries whose tax laws the United States does not like. I mean, this is another way in which the US, under the Trump regime, is seeking to bully countries that are investing substantial amounts, as Australia is, in the United States, because he doesn't like Australian government proposals to impose a digital services tax or to regulate high technology companies. He wants to apply higher taxes to Australian citizens and in particular to Australian superannuation funds. I mean, this is the kind of country that we are now having to deal with. Financial markets are clearly demonstrating that one of the ways in which the Trump regime is trashing America's brand is by undermining the role that the US dollar and US Treasury bonds have played for the best part of a century as a safe haven in times of uncertainty. Historically, even when the US has itself been a major source of uncertainty, as it was around the time of the global financial crisis, investors faced with uncertainty have bought US Treasury bonds and bought US dollars. Well, they're not doing that anymore. US bond yields are close to 5%. That's faster than the rate of growth in the US economy. And the US dollar is at its lowest level for about 3 years. The only safe havens for nervous investors now appear to be gold and the Swiss franc. So, the US is losing its shine, losing its appeal to tourists, to exporters, to what have traditionally been military allies. and to financial markets as well. It's all very sad.
Well, this is the bond markets are speaking, and as James Carville said, he would want to come back as a bond trader in another life.
Well, that's right. And the bond market and the currency markets are at least two institutions that Trump appears not to be able to bully. I mean, this has given rise to the acronym TACO, Trump always chickens out. And we've seen that in his walking back from the so-called reciprocal tariffs. And we've seen it in the negotiations they've had up to this point with China, that when Trump actually is confronted with someone who is stronger, more determined, perhaps a bit more thoughtful than he is, well, he actually does back down. And other countries are now starting to realise that, which is why, to go back to what we were saying before, I think Mr. Albanese has played this pretty well in not seeking to grovel to Trump in the hope of extracting concessions on tariffs, nor has he said anything publicly critical of Trump that might inflame the situation. I think he's played it fairly cleverly, and Australia's been well served by that.
Well, we'll watch it with great fascination, Saul, and we're entering a whole new age.
Indeed we are.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Not at all.
So what's happening in the news? Well, a US attack on Iranian nuclear sites could be a market-defining move. It could push oil prices even higher and trigger a knee-jerk rush to safety, investors said, as they assessed how the latest escalation of tensions would ripple through the global economy. US President Donald Trump's decision to join the Israeli attacks on Iran on Sunday represents a wild card that many investors didn't expect, and certainly are not positioned for. This will rattle markets, and the scale of the damage depends almost entirely on Iran's next move, not America's. This shatters the illusion of containment, wrote SPI Asset Management's Stephen Innes. What was a regional proxy conflict is now a high-stakes US-driven air war targeting WMD infrastructure with unpredictable spillovers across energy markets, global shipping lanes and risk sentiment. I think the markets are going to be initially alarmed, and I think oil will open higher, said Mark Spindell, Chief Investment Officer at Potomac River Capital. We don't have any damage assessment, and that will take some time. Even though Trump has described this as done, we're engaged, Spindell said. I think the uncertainty is going to blanket the markets, as now Americans everywhere are going to be exposed. It's going to raise uncertainty and volatility, particularly in oil. A key concern for markets centres around the potential impact of Middle East developments on oil prices and thus on inflation. Rising inflation could dampen consumer confidence and lessen the chance of near-term interest rate cuts. James Bambino of S&P Global warned that while global oil reserves are sufficient for now, any disruption in shipping could spark inflation. In a step towards what is widely seen as Iran's most effective threat to hurt the West, Parliament approved a move to close the Strait of Hormuz. Attempting to choke off Gulf oil by closing the strait could send global oil prices skyrocketing, derail the world economy, and invite almost certain conflict with the US Navy's massive Fifth Fleet, based in the Gulf and tasked with keeping the strait open. Nearly a quarter of global oil shipments pass through the narrow waters that Iran shares with Oman and the United Arab Emirates. Security experts have long warned a weakened Iran could also find other unconventional ways to strike back, such as bombings or cyber attacks. Saul Kavanagh, a senior energy analyst at equity research firm MST Marquee in Sydney, said Iran could respond by targeting American interests in the Middle East, including Gulf oil infrastructure in places such as Iraq, or harassing ship passages through the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz lies between Oman and Iran and is a primary export route for oil producers such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Iraq and Kuwait. Much depends on how Iran responds in the coming hours and days, but this could set us on a path towards $100 oil if Iran responds as they had previously threatened to, Kavanagh said. Economists warned that a dramatic rise in oil prices could damage a global economy already strained by Trump's tariffs. And a bipartisan coalition of powerful United States congressmen has gone into bat for the AUKUS nuclear submarine pact, assuring Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth that the sale of US-made vessels to Australia will not undermine American military strength. 3 Republican and 2 Democrat lawmakers who serve on Foreign Affairs and Defence Committees in the lower house wrote to Hegseth on Monday, that's Tuesday Australian Eastern Standard Time, expressing stronger support for AUKUS and the sale of Virginia-class submarines, saying domestic shipbuilding is ramping up. This comes with the Albanese government being warned that a Pentagon review risks imperiling Australia's nuclear submarine ambitions if the United States administration takes a hardline stance on the threat from China in the coming years. American national security experts warn that the outcome of a 30-day review of the AUKUS Pact would be a White House push for more investment from Canberra, either in its own defence hardware or for US shipbuilding facilities. Australia's planned purchases of American-made submarines, which are desperately needed to supplement its aging fleet and set for first delivery in the early 2030s, could be held to ransom or canned if those sales would unacceptably weaken the US Navy. We're all competing for scarce resources, said Alexander Gray, the chief executive of advisory firm American Global Strategies, who worked on security in the Indo-Pacific in the first Trump administration. I think we have to prioritise US industrial capacity to provide for the US Navy's needs, and that has to be our number 1, 2 and 3 priority. Such an outcome would be a huge setback for the Albanese government and a shock for the Australian community, given Defence Minister Richard Marles has said he remained confident Canberra's nuclear submarine plans were on track and downplayed the review as a routine undertaking by a new administration. It would also represent a snub by the US of one of its closest allies and the latest foreign policy about-face by President Donald Trump. And good news for anyone expecting the RBA will cut rates in July. According to the latest data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the ABS, Australia's monthly CPI indicator for May is lower than expected. The CPI indicator slowed to 2.1% on year from 2.4% the previous month, undershooting market expectations of a 2.3% rise. And economists have responded to Treasurer Jim Chalmers' pledge last week to overhaul Australia's tax system by telling him to consider raising or broadening the GST, as new research from the E61 Institute shows it will cost $349 billion over the next decade to cut income taxes while still returning the budget to surplus. While Chalmers has said he would not rule in or rule out policies, he has downplayed the possibility of raising or broadening the 10% GST following the upcoming productivity roundtable from August the 19th and 21st. I think it's hard to adequately compensate people. I think often an increase in the GST is spent 3 or 4 times over by the time people are finished with all the things that they want to do with it, Chalmers said last week. But economists have warned the Albanese government will struggle to meaningfully reduce the tax system's reliance on income tax without either raising the rate of the GST above 10% or broadening the impost to cover exempted areas like fresh food and education. The GST exemptions were worth about $30 billion in foregone revenue, according to Treasury. Without reform, the E61 Institute estimates the average full-time worker would see their average tax rate rise to 23% by 2035-36 from 20.7% based on the parliamentary budget long-term projections. That is equivalent to the average full-time worker paying an extra $2,400 per year in tax in today's dollars in a decade. To return bracket creep but still achieve a surplus within a decade, E61 Institute estimated the government would need to raise alternative taxes by $46 billion over the next 4 years, or by $349 billion over the next decade in today's dollars. And the chairman of the Australian Securities Investments Commission, Joseph Longo, has embraced Treasurer Jim Chalmers' call to cut red tape. This comes after Chalmers saying over the weekend that he'd written to all regulators under his and Finance Minister Katie Gallagher